Hi, today we're going to talk about the life cycle of a novel, the different stages it will go through as you are creating it. People enjoyed my previous video on writing a second draft, but I haven't talked about first drafts yet, so let's step back and look at the whole process from that first seed of an idea to your final draft when you can call it done. I want to share this with you so that you can learn from my experience. I want each and every one of you to write a great book. And I know each and every one of you has at least one book in you, if not a dozen books or more. I don't want to see you making the same mistakes I did starting out. I'd rather see you learning from my mistakes and doing this the easy way. And it can be easy, trust me. Welcome to The Edge, where I explore writing, world building, and how to use AI to enhance your creativity. If that sounds like your thing, you're in the right place. This is embarrassing, but I have to tell you about my first book. The book where I learned to write by doing pretty much everything wrong. I didn't have a plan. I did not have a clear vision. I wasn't saying anything that mattered. I didn't develop my characters or my world before I started. I didn't have an organized approach to revisions, and I spent 6 years beating my head against this book. Let me say that again, 6 years. That's not good. And you know what? This novel is terrible. It's a 180,000 word mess with a plot that moves slower than most glaciers. Too many characters in too many places doing too many different things, most of which don't matter to the central story. It's messy, muddled, has an unsatisfying ending, and of those 180,000 words, at least 100,000 of them are just boring and badly written. It is such a mess, I doubt I'll ever open it up again or spend any time trying to salvage it. This is what we in the business call a trunk novel. You'll never see it, and I'll probably never look at it again. But it was 6 years, 6 long, frustrating years, and all I learned was what not to do. So don't be like me. Instead, approach your novel with a plan. Understand that writing a book is a process and approach each step in that process in a deliberate and organized way. This will ensure that 1, you finish the book. That's very important. 2, you don't spend more time on it than you need to. And 3, in the end, you're going to have something you're happy with. And that's important. I want you to write something, I want you to finish it, and I want you to be happy with it. So let's walk through the life cycle of a book, looking at it as a series of organized, distinct steps, each with a purpose and a time frame. And along the way, I'll share some of the techniques and lessons I've learned the hard way, so this process will be easier for you than it was for me. Find the novel's soul. A lot of writers will do what they might call a zero draft, or as one viewer of the channel called it, a skeleton draft. I think skeleton draft is a great term. It's the skeleton that forms the underlying framework of everything that's going to come after. And as you lay on the muscles, the nervous system, the skin, eventually you're going to bring your amazing creation to life. And some writers jump right in, laying down scenes and chapters of the first draft without any outline or plan, discovering the story as they go. And I've talked to people who do this, and they find it very exciting and refreshing because it's an act of discovery. So for them, writing the book is as exciting as reading a book. But whether you start with a skeleton draft, a detailed outline, or just jump right in, you'll eventually have a first draft, and then you'll go through the rest of this process pretty much the same way everyone else does. But let's look at the beginning, the thing that happens before you write anything. You have an idea. You might think it's good enough to build a novel around, but how do you know? Is this idea really worth a year or more of your life? Is it strong enough to carry an entire book? I'm going to run with the body analogy here. If your novel is an unholy Frankenstein-like creation of skin and muscle over an underlying skeleton, it's going to need that magic spark to bring it to life. It's going to need a soul. And that's really the first step. Before you write a single word, make sure your novel has a soul. This is a step you'll see both new and established writers miss. They'll poop out something that's absolute garbage without a clear underlying theme or purpose, something they wrote quickly to meet a deadline or as a soulless cash grab. And when you read a book like this, you can tell. It has no heart, it has no energy, it has no life, no purpose. It should never have been written in the first place. It's uninteresting, it's trite, and you'll forget it as soon as you put it down. And you don't want your book to be one of these trash pieces. You want to make sure anything you write has a soul, has a purpose for existing, and by existing makes the world a better place. Don't be one of those authors. Before you commit a year or more of your life to writing a novel, make sure you are telling a story worth telling. Make sure you're telling a story for a reason your readers will care about. Don't write filler or fluff just to write. Write with purpose. Write about something that matters. So if you have an idea, apply the soul test. Is this idea going to be sufficient to give life to an entire novel? Is it unique? Does it have a purpose? Do you care about it? Will your readers care about it? Will it make the world a better place by existing? If so, you have an idea worthy of a novel. Proceed to step 0. If not, bounce that idea around some more. Try different ideas. Don't move on until your novel has a soul. And if you don't have an idea yet, honestly, that's a whole different video. All I'm going to say here is don't force it. Write a short story. Read a couple of books. Do some brainstorming activities. But don't start writing a novel until you really, really, really know what it's about. Otherwise, you'll get frustrated, you'll waste your time, and you'll come back to ground zero. Pre-writing and the skeleton draft. Next comes the pre-writing phase, and this will be different depending on the genre and the kind of story that you're trying to tell. If you're working in the realms of science fiction, fantasy, alternate history, you're going to do a lot of world building. And this is the right channel for that, so check out my world building playlist for tips on building memorable, consistent, believable worlds. If it's historical fiction, romance, a thriller, or a mystery, you'll have some degree of research you probably need to really understand your setting and the time period where your story takes place. But whether you're placing it in a real place, in a real time, or somewhere you've completely made up, take the time to thoroughly understand when and where your novel is happening. Understand the views and attitudes of the people living there, the economics, the social strata, the arts and entertainment, common worldviews and attitudes about different things. This will make your novel come to life. But don't get stuck. Don't spend too long on this step. Some writers get too caught up in it. They catch world builder's disease. Some period writers turn into armchair historians and get lost in their research. If you let this step get out of control, you'll end up doing something, and it might be fun, but it won't be writing a novel. So my advice is to limit your pre-writing to 1 month. You can keep doing research and world building after this, but you should move briskly on to the next phase of your creation rather than delaying it with further pre-writing. This is also the phase where you flesh out your characters. Determine who the cast consists of, what they're like, what their goals are, their worldviews, their beliefs about themselves, their strengths, and of course, their weaknesses. Characters readers care about have a great deal of complexity. They are imperfect. They have room for growth. They have more than one motive competing against each other. A character who starts out too perfect is the most boring thing on earth, and these kind of Mary Sue characters have ruined more books and movies than I can count. Make your characters interesting, complex, imperfect, or else your readers are not going to care about them. And if they don't care about your characters, they're not going to care about your novel. And of course, the outliners among us will outline as part of pre-writing. This can be a simple 2 to 3 page schematic like the kind you create using the snowflake method. It can be a bulleted list, or it can be a detailed 40 to 50 page treatment that covers every chapter and every scene. But whatever your outlining process happens to be, I'll leave you with the same suggestion I did on world building and research. Don't spend too much time on it. Some people get lost in their outlines, and this blocks them from writing the book. Give it a month, no more. After a month, use what you have and start writing. After the pre-writing, you can write a 0th draft. That's a hard thing to say, 0th draft. Ugh. Let's call it a skeleton draft because that's a more interesting name and it's easier to pronounce. Personally, I think this is a very smart choice, as a skeleton draft will reveal structural problems, character problems, and issues with your core concept before you spend 3 to 6 months writing that first draft. A skeleton draft is more than an outline because you're actually writing scenes and chapters. You're just not putting a lot in them. Sparse description, abbreviated dialogue, outlines of action scenes and set pieces. This draft will be probably no more than a quarter the length of your actual novel, a few pages per chapter, no more. But you're actually writing it out, getting a feel for the place, the story, the characters, the point of view, the voice, and how you want to describe it all. It's also a place to experiment with unusual structures, complex timelines, and other ideas you may or may not carry forward. It's a low-stakes environment where you can afford to take risks, because if you throw it all away, you've only lost a couple weeks, maybe a month, and then you can just proceed with your next idea. And this exercise will also tell you if this story works. Do you see character growth? Do you have building tension that resolves in a satisfying climax? And does that resolution resolve the underlying story questions? And does it clearly have a soul? If it does, you're golden. Move on to the first draft. If it doesn't, spend more time here. This is your skeleton. It's a framework that determines the shape and the ultimate potential of your novel's final form. If your skeleton only has one leg, your finished novel is only going to have one leg. If your skeleton has a hunched back, your finished novel is going to have a hunched back. So make sure it's what you want before you move on to that first draft. And that's another reason why the skeleton draft is a great idea. It's a dry run of the first draft process, and it'll really show you what you've got and what you can do with it. It will save you time, heartache, and painful revisions. And once it's done, you're ready for your first draft. The first draft. This is where the writing really starts, where you start adding meat to the bones we developed in the pre-writing or skeleton draft phase. For those of you who went straight here and are going to pants this whole thing, that's awesome. I honestly don't know how you do it, but here you are, and I bet some of these tips will help you too. The goal of the first draft is to get your whole story written down. It does not have to be perfect. It does not have to be pretty, but it has to be done. Just like every other part of writing, there are a million ways to do this, and everyone approaches it a little differently. But here are some tips that will greatly improve your chances of finishing it and coming up with a draft that you actually like. First, focus on writing fast. Don't stop to edit or revise. If you make a mistake or change your mind about something, add a note, change the color of the font, or mark it in some other way, but keep moving forward because reaching the end is more important at this phase than polishing what you've already written down. Some people spend months or years writing and rewriting the first 2 or 3 chapters of a book and never finish the book. This is really a big problem for writers. I've seen this happen to over a dozen writers across multiple writers groups and workshops. They just get stuck. And people who get stuck here, honestly, most of them never get past it. Revision is a trap. Don't do it. Not yet. Writing fast also builds your confidence. The first time, it'll be like riding a bicycle for the first time. It's going to feel uncomfortable. It's going to feel unstable. You're going to be nervous. You're going to feel like you're going to fall down, like you're doing something wrong. But after you've done this 2 or 3 times and completed your book each time, you'll know you're going to reach the end. You'll know you're going to come up with something good, and you'll learn to stop second guessing yourself every 3rd page. You're a writer. You're a good writer. Trust yourself. And that trust is important in a first draft. Trust yourself and keep moving forward. And if you haven't built up that confidence yet, then just take this advice on faith. It works. Keep writing forward. Don't stop to revise on a first draft. As quickly as you can, get the whole story on paper. It doesn't have to be pretty. Your sentences don't have to be elegant or even grammatically correct. Your scenes don't have to have great pacing. Your chapters don't have to have hooks. All your characters can sound exactly like you. It doesn't matter. Just get the story onto the page. But your story does need a beginning, a middle, and an end. Until you have these things, keep pounding on it. Now, some people write in order from the beginning to the end. Other people write out of order, maybe focusing on particular characters or concepts, writing the idea they had in the shower that morning or the scene that's most exciting at the moment, moving back and forth through different sections of the book. Do what works for you. Honestly, I don't think the details matter as long as you get it done. And once it's done, it's time to move on to your second draft. The second draft. You started out with an idea. probably added some kind of framework or skeleton, and then you built the muscles and the skin in the first draft. Now you have something that looks like a novel. You might be the kind of writer that writes a really clean first draft, and if you are, I am so jealous of you. That's amazing. I can't do that. And from what I've seen, that's not what most people do, but a few people, they can pull it off, and it's awesome. But for most of us, the end of the first draft looks like some kind of misshapen, distorted homunculi that vaguely looks like a novel, but in a twisted, unnerving way. And you and I both know it's going to need a lot of work to get it into a form presentable to the public. I have a video that breaks down how to approach a second draft, chock full of great tips. Check it out here, or here, I don't know which side it's going to end up on, but check it out if you want more details on this step. The key things to keep in mind for a second draft. First, it's a good idea to plan a complete rewrite for your second draft. It should take less time than your first draft, but a complete rewrite is often easier and faster than trying to stitch together the disparate elements of your first draft. Second, it's probably too early to share it with beta readers or your writing group. Sharing too early is going to lead you down a bunch of rabbit holes that will waste your time and your energy. Finish the second draft, you'll have something that much more cleanly and clearly captures your vision, and that second draft is about the earliest you should share it with other people. Third, I suggest taking a pause to read your entire first draft. Make some notes, and maybe even a new second draft outline. That's actually what I do, which shows you in detail what you want your second draft to look like, including notes on pacing, scene and chapter structure, notes about elements you want to highlight and bring to the forefront, including personality traits of your characters, details of your world, clues and other elements of mysteries, engaging and believable interactions for your romance, and so on. Focus on the things you missed or which fell flat in the first draft so you can make them really shine in the second draft. And then turn that crank and finish the second draft. Third draft and later drafts. After your second draft, you have a novel. For most of you, it's not ready to be published yet. There's a lot more work to go, but it's a story that makes sense. It has a good structure. It's well paced. Some of the writing is probably good, and some of it probably needs more editing, but it should be good enough to share with your beta readers, and this is a good time to get feedback. A lot of things, including structural problems and plot holes, are easier to fix now than after you've spent a couple more months polishing everything. This is also a good time to take a break. You and your novel can benefit from some time away from each other. Let it sit idle for a couple weeks or a month. This allows you to get some distance from it, and when you start getting feedback or you reread it, you're going to see it with a fresh perspective and be more likely to catch your own mistakes and to see ways you can greatly improve it by bringing out things that maybe you didn't focus on as much as you could have, things you couldn't see when you were so close to it for so long. Some people will even set it aside while they write the first draft of their next project. And if you've got a good pipeline going, this is a great way to clear your mind and keep up your productivity. However you approach it, plan for a few more drafts. From here on out, each draft should go relatively quickly and will have a much more narrow focus, such as making scenes and chapters more crisp with clear ups and downs, putting in clever hooks to draw the readers forward, or drafts focusing on polishing the writing at the paragraph and sentence level. And some drafts will focus on structural, plot, or other problems that you find during your revision or that you've heard in the feedback from your beta readers. Here, writers diverge greatly. Some people only do 3 drafts. Some people do 7, 8, 12, 15, 20. My advice is to write as many drafts as you need to, but don't overdo it. You'll get farther as a writer by writing more books than you will by simply polishing one book endlessly. Don't be Sisyphus pushing that rock up the hill and letting it roll back down over you. Go on to the next hill. You'll be happier, you'll be more productive, you'll be more successful. Some things to try with subsequent drafts. Have each draft focus on one specific thing. For example, have one draft that focuses on sentence structure. Another draft that focuses on reducing your word count and getting rid of all the fluff. Another pass to get rid of troublesome words that you overuse. Another to focus on dialogue, making it clean, crisp, interesting, and ensuring the characters all have unique and distinct voices that you can tell apart even without their dialogue tags. You get the idea. So this is how I approach it. My third draft is about pacing and getting rid of fluff. My fourth draft is about dialogue and character development. My fifth draft is line editing, focusing on grammar, word use, and getting rid of troublesome words. I really try to not go past the 5th draft, but I have. I have an unpublished zombie novel that's been through 8 drafts, and the last time I read it, I decided it needs a 9th. Sadly, that 9th draft is mostly about reinserting scenes and characters I cut somewhere around the 6th draft when I was trying to trim it down to a specific word count. But on a reread, I see those parts are important to understand the characters and fleshing out the world, and it's not alive. It doesn't have as much of a soul without those elements. But that's what you have to do. You have to decide what you're going to keep and what you're going to toss, and you have to decide when you're done and when you're going to start working on your next book. And like in that example where I'm up to probably a 9th draft, I probably overworked that book. I probably should have stopped sooner because I started breaking things that were working, and then I've got to do another draft to go back and fix those things that I broke. So that's the life cycle of a novel. Sure, there's marketing, selling, publishing, and all that crap, but that's a topic for another video. Now get out there and write, you heathens.